John Judge, comments. It's up to you. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. Well, I was starting to respond to Ron's comments.
Let me remind people, John Judge is an independent researcher, co-founder of 9/11 Citizens Watch and 9/11 Research Project, and was a senior staffer on the Hill for Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. Go ahead, Ron. Go ahead, John.
I actually agree that the first question is, who do you want to do the investigation? Because the previously flawed investigation and it's flawed.
Well, so let's back it up. During the break, which people have not heard yet, although it's up on the blog, Ron said, and we'll bring him on in a second, who's going to do this? Because unless it's such and such and such and such kind of a structure, you're going to end up having the same investigation.
Well, I don't think that that's the case. But I think that obviously Congress is not, and these presidentially appointed commissions steeped in their own secrecy and their own politics are not the place to do it. We stood with the families back in the day and demanded an investigation, and we wanted one that was open and that was transparent, and we fought for that during it and fought them even to take testimony under oath. But this was not an investigation whose results we can do very much with because we don't even have the evidence in front of us to compare. I don't disagree that the evidence should be evaluated independently by people that are actual scientists and forensics and building engineers. I've said all those things from the start. I think you should get people who know what they're talking about. But I don't think an investigation like we had before, with all the conflicts of interest, with people recusing themselves, with Governor Greene saying that everyone in the commission would have to recuse themselves at some point from their own investigation, with one member and one staff testifying to their own commission. That commission was primarily a farce, and it blocked the outside input from the public and from the families themselves. And okay. I can go into many of the reasons why, and maybe we will, but my point is that you can have an independent investigation. There may be an investigation by the boroughs up in New York. You could have an investigation by trial. I have no theses that I've drawn from the evidence that I think can't withstand some scrutiny, and most of my work has been with those sorts of legal and scientific experts on the case, as well as historians and people that that have taken a serious look at it. I'm working from thousands of books. I'm working from additional thousands of clippings from reliable sources. I'm not going to a website or coming up with a thesis on my own. I don't think that ultimately we yet know or can know without release of more evidence exactly what happened, but we do know and can know that some of the conclusions that were released by this narrative put together by Zelikow, May, and Naftali, who are all tied with CIA background and all tied with the Miller Center, which is not a reliable source of even the transcripts that they made of the Kennedy Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay. That's not the place to start to try to figure it out, but their conclusions in that book can be deconstructed. Okay. Just from the evidence that we know outside.
John, how long have you been studying 9/11?
Well, I started from the inception. I had my head in my hands that day because I had done a talk in 1996 called "Are You Scared Yet?" Because what I saw was they were replacing the Cold War and communism with terrorism and counterterrorism, and it was clear to me that they were escalating and manipulating through intelligence covertly terrorist operations around the world, and then escalating domestic operations with the view that this would then allow them to consolidate power in the government, go to continuity of government, or go to martial law. So I knew, regardless of who caused the building to come down, exactly what this system would do with it, and I said so on September the 13th, that they were going into a national security state, they were going into a permanent war situation, they were going to suspend civil liberties, because that was all in the documents of the RAND Corporation and the War College studies.
And the purpose for that, the purpose of COG or continuity of government and that whole strategy is what?
It is a reactive strategy that has to do with building a fortress state out of the United States and putting us in a permanent warfare mode.
And the purpose for that is what?
And perpetuating enemies in order to have social or political or economic control. It's also an extension of the last stages of global corporatism and the concentration of wealth worldwide, to a point that it replicates the engines that drove fascism in World War II.
Wow.
And drove that into a genocidal and closed state. But these are historical trends, and the specific history of 9/11, how we get in, which were referred to by your guest Daniel, and are important, are not generally what's being discussed, and were denied by Hamilton and the Commission. He said that even the premise that the United States had an involvement in the Mujahideen uprising in Afghanistan or funded it covertly was not a premise he was willing to accept, even though there's a great deal of evidence that Saudi and the United States together spent $6 billion on that covert operation and funded it with drugs and carried it on into a second one that was called Contragate. And that's why it's significant then, if you study that historical framework, to come up with the fact that $100,000 is transferred from Pakistani intelligence, General Mahmoud Ahmed, and he transfers $100,000 through an intermediary, Saeed Sheikh, who has his own particular history with U.S. and British intelligence, to Mohammed Atta in Sarasota, Florida, at a time when Atta is renting his room from one of the Iran-Contra pilots. And similar money is going out to the West Coast through this route. And
hold on. Okay.
Pakistani ISI
John.
is the main conduit of the CIA money into the Afghan revolt, and the main people that took it were Hekmi Attar, the big drug dealer, and his protege,
John.
Yes.
Okay. It's a lot of data, a lot of detail.
Well,
hold on, no, my turn. John, stop.
Yes.
Stop. We got to go to a break.
Okay.
Where can people, I mean, you very provocatively queued up something that I had not heard of before, which is the connection between Iran-Contra and 9/11. I think it's a fascinating premise. Where can people find out more about this? Because we're not going to have time to go.
The best recent book is Peter Dale Scott, Road to 9/11.
Okay. We had
his
Peter
earlier
on
works
last
on
week,
Iran-Contra.
Right? Okay, good. So we're going to come back. I'm sure Ron Wieck is just foaming at the mouth, ready to not in any personal way am I trying to be degrading Ron, but obviously you can't wait to get into this fight. When we come back, however, we're going to talk to Kyle Hentz, who is the executive producer of 9/11 Press for Truth, has studied this extensively, has a different angle on it, I'm sure, than John. And hopefully by the end of all of this, unfortunately, we will not have all the answers we want, but at least we will have teed up some questions that perhaps we should continue to create a structure, if not any longer on Air America, but certainly a larger societal structure to address in each and every one of these questions, because that is what Americans deserve, and that's what America should all be about. This is Richard Greene. This is Clout. This is Air America. Come on back. And we're back, and take a couple minutes to bring in our next to last participant, and that is Kyle Hentz, who is the executive producer of 9/11 Press for Truth, which reminds me a lot of Scott McClellan, because it's a lot about how the press fell down on the job with respect to the actual reporting and investigation of 9/11. Kyle Hentz, welcome to Clout.
Hey, it's good to be on with you. Thanks.
So you've been listening very patiently. You've got a couple minutes before, yes, we have to take another break.
Okay.
Give us your thoughts.
Well, my thoughts, let's see. I think what we're talking about here is overcoming fear, to look at some things that maybe make people uncomfortable. What we're talking about is very simple. It's about accountability and transparency. These are like two core pillars to a healthy society, healthy government that is accountable to the people. And, there are a number of ways we can get to the truth. There are a number of ways we can exact accountability, but we need the rule of law, and we need responsible parties doing what's right relative to what happened on 9/11.
Right. So you very strongly believe that we need another investigation.
Well, we need the truth. We need another investigation, whatever form that could or might take. Yes, absolutely, very strongly.
Okay. Tell us very quickly, and when we come back, we're going to try to play a little bit. What is 9/11 Press for Truth about?
It's a documentary that tells the story of about a dozen family members featuring the so-called Jersey girls. Lori was on earlier. She's one of them. And it's their fight for the investigation and the flaws of the investigation, some of the deception, the failure of the press to connect the dots.
Executive producer, 9/11 Press for Truth. We're going to be right back with a lot more. Stay tuned. And we're back for our last half hour, and let's listen in on about a minute of 9/11 Press for Truth, executive produced by Kyle Hentz.
There's a lot of explosive information that has come out in the mainstream press, but it comes out buried. I'd never noticed any of this stuff.
Why is the Attorney General of the United States doing all his air travel by specially chartered jet?
They were going to sleep on a boat so that a plane couldn't go into a building.
They did have definitive intelligence to his location within Tora Bora.
No plane could fly from Kunduz to Pakistan without getting shot down unless we let it happen. And we let it happen.
The goal has never been to get bin Laden.
Are you suggesting there was a state sponsor behind 9/11?
The night before, Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan.
He pointed and said, those towers are coming down.
Had that been Iraqi intelligence, do you think we would have heard of it?
And that was from 9/11 Press for Truth. Kyle, what's your point in the movie?
What's the point of the documentary?
Yeah.
Well, it was touched on in the very beginning of that clip. You heard from Paul Thompson, the founder of Cooperative Research and the 9/11 timeline. Basically, the failure. One of the messages of the film was the failure of the mainstream press to connect the dots. You know, there was a lot of bits and pieces that came out, verifiable fact, reported here and there or buried in back pages that were just never connected, so that you could see a pattern. And there were a number of whistleblowers that brought pieces of information and evidence forward that ended up not being heard by the commission or ignored by the commission. And so we look at that. But the film itself starts off by telling the story of the family members who fought for a commission against an administration from the get-go that did not want to have one. They did not want to look at this. And it was 441 days, in fact, before the commission was made law and it began its work.
So in a way, this is really another Scott McClellan kind of situation where the press didn't do their job, and it's
absolutely
it's a sad thing. It's a hugely important thing, which is why, again, as I say so often, I am so proud to be associated with Air America, because we are allowed to say and do whatever we want, even though there might be people at Air America who are not happy about this 5-week series on 9/11. At least we have the ability to do it, and there's
and kudos to you for having the courage to step out and do it.
Well, I'm an American, and this is, the First Amendment. If we're not going to have that, why the hell are we Americans?
Yeah, well, if I may, my hope is that, imagine for a second, if one of the commissioners or one of the heads, one of the top people at the staff, one of the team leaders in the 9/11 Commission staff were to come forward and do what Scott McClellan did. And what kind of revisiting or reframing of the 9/11 Commission and then ultimately perhaps of the event itself might we experience? What might we see? And in fact, this has already happened. I mean, if you read what Max Cleland, before he got bumped off the commission, said, that they were scamming America, or what former Senator Kerry, who heads the New School in New York, said in a review of Phil Shannon's book called The Commission, The Uncensored History of the 9/11 Investigation, when he basically, has called upon, Congress to continue the investigation, and his particular beef was about the censorship that happened in the commission of the Saudi links, the San Diego cell, and what was going on there with money flowing into that particular cell. So even you have a former commissioner now, because of the scrutiny of Phil Shannon and others, saying, we need to look at this again. Even Tom Kane has said this is not the last word. So my hope is that Just as whistleblowers have come forward before, there'll be others, and we'll have an opportunity either through a trial, a real trial. I'm not talking about the kind of kangaroo kind of court that we're likely to get down in Guantanamo, but a real trial or perhaps a new investigation in by the city of New York.
Right, Kyle, thank you. Ron Wieck, a host of Hard Fire, New York City. You are a debunker. You're connected with James Randi, the Skeptic Society. Isn't that the point? The fact that no one has done a Scott McClellan on 9/11, no one who's part of the commission or no one who's been part of the government has come out and said anything that is anything close to what Scott McClellan just did. Ron, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can now. Go ahead.
Okay, I've been mopping the foam off my keyboard here.
There you go. I knew it. Go ahead.
Incidentally, thanks to Mr. Pinchbeck, he has finally given the 9/11 Truth Movement the slogan it's been waiting for. You know, truth is not about facts, and for them, that's certainly hitting the nail on the head.
Ron, listen, we have limited time here, and if you're going to completely take a comment out of context, I'm going to just cut you off.
You do that all the time.
No, honestly, I've invited you back now 3 times. I've given you a lot of time. Go ahead. I asked you a question. Is that basically your point? In other words, hey, no one's come forth. The 9/11 Commission is the truth. Otherwise, we would have had a Scott McClellan kind of situation.
Can I ask you why it's necessary to pretend that the 9/11 Commission investigated the attacks themselves? I mean, we know that the 9/11 Commission did not do that. That a massive multi-agency effort combining the FBI, other intelligence gathering agencies, 7,000 agents from the FBI alone. That was the investigation.
Well,
the 9/11 Commission simply put together a narrative.
Well, hold on. John Judge, how do you respond to that?
Their narrative, and they started writing it before they got the facts together. There certainly were many agencies involved, but the problem is we have absolutely no way to know what evidence those agencies provided to the commission because they locked up all of their material. So you've got a book that says trust us. We've got 1,000 footnotes, but you can't see any of the evidence or even the interviews that we used, whether they're classified or not, to compare them to the book.
Ron Wieck, if there's nothing to hide, why are they hiding?
Well, you know, actually he has a good point there, because I've spoken to FBI agents, and I ask them, I say, look, I get this from so-called truthers all the time, that the FBI didn't investigate for explosives, and the FBI guy will laugh, and he'll say, gee, you know, it's funny, it's our job to investigate for explosives, but I guess we forgot. I guess all of us just plain forgot. Now, yeah, I understand that what the truth movement is saying is idiotic and preposterous. But on the other hand, why doesn't the FBI simply come forward, be a little more open with the public and say, look, you've been hearing these things from the truth movement. They're nonsense, and here's why they're nonsense. You know, so I'll go that far with you. I will certainly agree that we should have more openness. Look, I told you about a discussion I had with Chris Cogent, former senior counsel to the 9/11 Commission. I was asking him about Norman Mineta. I said, why didn't you simply issue a statement that Mineta's testimony was discredited? Well, it was obviously discredited. Well, it wasn't so obvious that people don't still invent new canards every other week.
Well, you know, it's anything, when you are disagreeing with the Vice President of the United States, the current Vice President, I believe that anyone who disagrees with him has an absolute presumption of truth, because Dick Cheney is, I think, psychologically incapable of telling the truth. So I don't think Norman Mineta has been discredited in any way, shape, or form. So Ron Wieck,
Norman Mineta's timeline is off by 30 to 40 minutes. It's been discredited by every other witness and by the law.
John Judge, is that true?
Well, there's certainly a dispute there, and there's claims about it from different sectors, and I think, as I mentioned, Peter Dale Scott's book does, I think, a fairly thorough review and refutation of the other timelines that were developed in relation to it.
Okay, but doesn't this all beg the question, Ron and John, that we need this whole thing, 9/11, has to be at least somewhat as important as the O.J. Simpson trial, that had the entire country glued to television sets 24/7 for 9 months, and then there was a civil trial after that. We have not given anything close to that kind of national scrutiny to something that killed not 2 people in Brentwood, but 3,000 people plus. Do we need to have another investigation, or are you really content with all of the questions having been settled and let's move on? Ron?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yes.
Okay, your question actually breaks down into 2 parts. The investigation itself was massive. The point is the public doesn't know what it entailed.
Well,
now,
why would
should
that
be written up better? Should it be presented more clearly? If that is what the 9/11 Commission was intended to do, then they fell short of that goal, and I would stand with you.
They were legally mandated to do it.
Yes, I mean, again, people think that this whole subject was given short shrift. It was not. Again, 7,000 FBI agents alone working on what the Bureau described as the most comprehensive investigation in its history.
Ron, they were pulled off as soon as the anthrax attacks happened. They were pulled off.
No, they
the 9/11 investigation.
No, they weren't.
Thousands of them were.
Well, you don't need 7,000 at every stage.
Right. But the investigation was so massive, Ron, that within 24 hours they were able to produce the names of the hijackers, and then not long after that their pictures and their images. So it was so massive, and so they were so on top of this. They were able to produce that level of specificity as to the perpetrators. So
the identification
that's how massive it was, Ron.
It wasn't definitive until November, as you know.
Right, but Kristen Breitweiser asked a very cogent question. She said, "How did they know which ATM machine to go to within hours if they were so caught off guard and surprised by what happened? They knew where to go in Portland. They knew which ATM to get, and then bingo, we're seeing images of
But that raises the question: is the FBI simply a tool of the Bush-Cheney administration? In other words, I don't know and you don't know how many thousands of FBI agents are Democrats and how many thousands are Republicans.
That's irrelevant to my point.
So you think, though, that the entire FBI is functioning as a Gestapo?
Absolutely not. No. It's a huge organization. But my point is that there were a whole number of investigations that were going on leading up to 9/11. And obviously some of them were targeting the very people that they blame 9/11 on, and they produced their names and their pictures. And many of those investigations were shut down methodically and by some of the same people repeatedly. David Frasca at the FBI headquarters at the Fundamentalist Unit, he shut down. Robert Wright, who tearfully told the families, apologized to the families. I tried to find, I tried to find those who are funding terrorism. Hamas, Yassin al-Qadi designated a terrorist right after 9/11. He was on their trail, but David Frasca and others basically stood in his way and shut his investigation down. Same with Colleen Rowley, who sabotaged her investigation of Moussaoui before 9/11. This is a pattern across the board. So they were very competent and at the field agent level, but someone higher up repeatedly shut these guys down.
This is a fruitful area of inquiry.
Absolutely.
Gerald Posner wrote the book Why America Slept, and he writes in the foreword to, I think, the newer edition that he was told by a Washington insider that America didn't merely sleep, it was comatose. Now, this is the breakdown in these intelligence gathering procedures. This is what needs to be studied.
Well, I don't actually buy the main thesis that Naftali was paid to develop for the commission. That this is an intelligence failure. There was massive intelligence ahead of time. They knew the specifics of the Bojinka plan by 1996. In 1999, I talked to the head of security at the Pentagon, who was outside the building and told me they were getting phone threats from Muslims and they were on Delta Alert, and he pointed to the roof and he said, and we have camera and radar up there to stop them if they try to run a plane into the building. And that's 1999.
Who is this person? What is his name?
His name was Robinson. He's Colonel Robinson. He's no longer there. He was the head of security for 30 years at the Pentagon. And I spoke to him directly myself in 1999, and of course they would have preparations, and also camera and radar would not stop a plane.
Well, cameras wouldn't even pick up a plane moving.
This investigation relied on 7 different timelines of what happened to the planes that morning. Okay. And every time, even when their staff reports came out, they had different timelines on it.
Do you see, though, why we so-called debunkers are so skeptical of all of this? What is the narrative that the truth movement is putting forth here? What
First
are
of all,
they saying?
I'm not relying on somebody else's narrative. I am critiquing the commission itself. I don't have a narrative myself for exactly what happened. I want an investigation because this was not an investigation.
Well, Ron, let me interfere. That's a little bit like saying, no, Barack Obama or John McCain or McBush can't go to talk to the president of Iran without preconditions. The whole thing here is to sit down, to take all of the evidence, and to honestly, with great skill, go through all of it so that we come up with the narrative that it's organically coming out of an honest, objective search for the truth. This is Richard Greene.
Hold on, we got to take a break. 10,000 pages. Don't you think that's an objective search for truth?
Well, we'll come back and we'll deal with that question with John Judge, independent researcher, 9/11 Citizens Watch, Kyle Hentz, executive producer, 9/11 Press for Truth, and Ron Wieck, the host of Hardfire, a New York City television show. This is Richard Greene. This is Clout. We're going to come back. It'll be a short segment, but hopefully we'll solve all of the outstanding questions in the next few minutes. Stay tuned. Well, as we go into the last few minutes of our 5 shows debating, analyzing the issue of 9/11, hopefully we've been able to at least provoke some questions, some thoughts, cover some ground that the corporate media has not. That is the raison d'etre, the DNA of Air America. This topic deserves far, far more than 5 nights. It could be 5 months, 5 years. I believe that it begs questions that go to the core, as Daniel Pinchbeck was talking about, to some extent, the core of who we are as a people. It's been an honor to be in a position to at least do this much, and I appreciate your appreciation and also your constructive comments. Ron Wieck, your last thoughts here, just about 30 seconds, and then we got to wrap it up with everybody else having their same concluding
Well, thanks
thoughts.
for everything, Richard. I'd love to see a debate between NASA engineer Ryan Mackey and someone from the Truth Movement, Griffin or Kevin Ryan, but the problem is, if you've tried to arrange such a debate, you know they won't do it. Only the public can be served by such a debate.
Who's the they that won't do it?
Griffin will not debate Ryan Mackey.
Ron, I'll tell you, I'll make you a deal. You and I will continue to stay in touch, and if we can put on some sort of event either on or off the radio, perhaps a live event in New York City or Los Angeles, let's do that. Ron, I want to thank you for being a good sport and holding your own very nicely.
Well, thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.
John Judge, independent researcher, 9/11 Citizens Watch, concluding thoughts.
Make sure that the documents that are locked up till January 2nd, 2009 are released at that point. Then we could begin to assess the 9/11 Commission report and take a hard look at the report itself on its own terms, not in terms of someone's proposed theory, but just whether its own evidence will prove its point, and I would argue that it will not when you go into any detail with it, and realize that the flawed investigation, flawed from its inception, and its conclusions and premises led to a flawed conclusion, which led to horrible recommendations that have left us in a worse situation with no critique of the Bush administration policies, with the impending of continuity of government and martial law in the United States, suspension of habeas corpus, and all the rest, and an assumption, because even Daniel, who talked earlier about global warming being a bigger problem than this, and I don't disagree, but when you live in a situation where you can only believe and not know, where you cannot have flow of information, then the lies of the Bush administration in that matter have long over delayed the response to even an understanding of global warming.
Thank you so much. I agree. Thank you so much, John Judge. Last words, Kyle Hentz.
Well, thank you, first of all. And just in closing, I just want to say that we cannot begin with flawed premises if we have another investigation, and that we must open our minds and we must at least consider the prospect of a false flag terrorist attack. I would encourage everyone out there to Google Gladio. This is a history that we need to learn and understand in the context of what happened on 9/11 that could happen again.
And we will put all of these references up on airamerica.com/clout. I want to thank all of you for listening. Any comments, just Air America facebook.com/Clout. This is Richard Greene. It was a pleasure to provide this programming for you. We'll see you tomorrow night. Take care.